All right, it is 4 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started here. And I'm going to lock up my mouse so that quits happening, because that's the second time that's happened. All right, welcome again to the first in our summer webinar series on trauma-informed financial education for every classroom. So if you could please sign in with your name and school or district in the chat. That is our first step in taking attendance and making sure that you get the clock hours you deserve for being here. These slides and resources will be made available for you after the presentation. And we will also have a recording of this webinar up on our YouTube channel after the presentation as well. And our incredible program specialist, Linda, who has been working so hard to get us all registered and working on the logistics for this. We appreciate you, Linda. She's going to tell us a little bit about how you will receive your clock hours.
Thank you, Amy. So for this webinar, we are going to have 1.5 clock hours available. And as Amy said, if you could put your name and district in the chat, then we can take attendance like that. If you signed up originally through Survey Gizmo registration, I've added your name automatically to PD Enroller. So you won't have to take that extra step to do that. So when you log into PD Enroller, you should be able to see those in your transcripts once I do that, probably in the next, probably tomorrow, by tomorrow. So does anyone have any questions about registration or clock hours? You can also message me with any questions at the FEPP inbox at FEPPP@k12.wa.us, or just hit me up in the chat. Thanks.
And Linda, we have one question. Does this apply to all future PDs? So within this series, will they need to do those same steps?
So once you have filled out that one registration form in Survey Gizmo and checked the boxes of the sessions that you want to attend, I'll go ahead and add those to PD Enroller.
So if that doesn't answer your question, or if you have any additional questions, oh, great. Thanks, Amanda. All right, and last but certainly not least, please feel free to engage during this webinar, participate in the chat, and write questions into the Q&A feature or the chat. We are going to have a panel discussion at the end, and would really love to be able to address your specific questions to meet your student or community needs. And with that, we'll go ahead and get going here. I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. This map is from native-land.ca, where you can find world maps of all of our homes on native land. I am going to be reading from the Spokane City Council land acknowledgement, where I am joining you from, Spokane, Washington. If you would like, please feel free to share the area that you are joining us from today. I'd love to know where people are connecting with across the state. But I acknowledge that we are on the unceded lands of the Spokane people, and that these lands were once the major trading center for the Spokanes, as they shared this place and welcomed other area tribes through their relations, history, trade, and ceremony. We also want to acknowledge that the land holds the spirit of the place through its knowledge, culture, and all the original peoples since time immemorial. Awesome. Thank you to those sharing where you're joining us from. Love it. All right. So I'm just going to check in real quick with everybody. How are we doing today? You have on your screen a sheep scale. And if you could take a look at these sheep and let me know which one you connect with the most today, and just type that number into the chat. Give me just a little preview of how people are doing. We were joking earlier that I really needed to find a hot sheep, because that one would probably fit the bill. Let's see, we've got 3 every day from my director, Lance, who has a lot of hair and a big beard, if you get that, if you know him. Oh, it looks like Jenefeness is coming back in. Let's see, I've got we've got across the board here. I wouldn't even see that one is 2 or 3. Some people with 1, yeah, because it's warm. I love it. We have a wide range of sheep here today. I have to be honest, I'm number 9. I am so thrilled to be here today and to be starting this webinar series with these powerhouse guest speakers that I have. And I'm so excited to bring this knowledge to you guys. Awesome. Thank you for participating. So quickly, just looking at our objectives for the day today, we're going to go through what I call kind of a quick deconstruction of the spending and saving knowledge outlined in our Washington State financial education standards. Then we're going to talk about financial trauma and the social and emotional parts of personal finance and how these impact our in the classroom and outside the classroom. And finally, we'll have some Q&A time with our esteemed panelists, Jenefeness Franke and Minda Michelle Maddox, and they can share their ideas, experiences, and best practices. And I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves in just a moment here. All right, moving through the introduction, I would love to tell you briefly a little bit about us, the Financial Education Public-Private Partnership, or FEPPP. We were formed in 2004 by legislative mandate. So the Washington State Legislature is invested, see what I did there? Invested in increasing the amount of public school or of financial education that our K-12 Washington students get in public schools. So we support this with our primary responsibilities of reviewing financial education instructional materials and developing a robust clearinghouse of those materials on our website, which you see there, FEPPP3ps.org. We even have it sorted by grade band. We also do exactly what you're seeing right now. We provide professional development, both at this level and on a local district support level, and training opportunities at no cost. And excitingly, we also facilitate a grant, SB 5720, which is it's a non-competitive grant that provides funds for increasing the amount of personal finance instruction that a district is currently providing. That is not something I'm going to be spending a lot of time talking about today, but if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out to us at FEPP.org and we can get you the necessary information. And then let's see here. All right, and just briefly, I want to hit on some of the reasons why financial education is important. Why are we here? Why do we talk about it? Earlier in the year, Minda Michelle was actually a panelist at that webinar as well. I worked with the graduation equity webinar team at the OSPI, Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, on a webinar on financial literacy and asset-based engagement. And we had a researcher, Dr. Carly Urban, come and present some of the findings on financial education, which you can see here. And we see a lot of positive benefits and outcomes for students participating in financial education, which is great. That's the goal, right? But as a former classroom educator, I know this begins and ends with educators. So, and the research even supports that. If effects are big for students, that we can assume that the educators will feel some of these impacts as well. And part of the reason why we're here is because research is a little conflicted on how teachers feel about instructing giving personal finance instruction, that teacher's self-efficacy, that teacher confidence part. We've seen research that said that teachers feel confident in this material. And we've seen research from Dr. Henniger here locally for me at Whitworth University that says teachers don't feel confident in this material. So we see all of these benefits. We know that it's beneficial for everybody. But as I said, it begins and ends with teachers and making them feel confident in bringing this material to the classroom, which is what we're hoping we'll do today. So then at this point, I would like to introduce myself and share a little bit of my story and how I found myself here and why this subject matters to me. You can see my name is Amy Cleaver, by the way, if I haven't introduced myself yet. Hello. You can see some of my qualifications on the screen, but I'm a former classroom educator between 5th grade and 7th grade primarily. And 3 years into my teaching career, I had accumulated over $15,000 in consumer credit card debt. Yet here I am working for a financial education organization, giving a professional development on saving, spending, and budgeting, right? So this is my financial wellness story. And I mentioned that financial wellness term a lot because to me, it means considering finances as a part of your overall mental, physical, social, and emotional well-being. And in 2023, over half of Americans reported that financial stress is negatively affecting their mental health. And I can completely connect to that because I'm not here as a person with all of the answers. I could have really used this professional development when I was a classroom educator, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to put it on. I've always been a compulsive shopper. I've always leaned towards the spending side of the spectrum. And I ended up with, like I said, over $15,000 worth of credit card debt. And it's not just that I had the debt. I was keeping the debt a secret from everybody in my life. Nobody knew about this. I could talk about almost any other stress that I was experiencing except this one. So it was snowballing. It was compounding, as credit cards do. Caused me so much stress. I'm laying up at night thinking about it. So then at this part, right, it's impacting my overall wellness, what I'm able to bring into the classroom, and what I had left over for myself at the end of the day as well. So I started a classroom economy as a behavior management system. Really what it was at the beginning, I had 36 kids. I was overwhelmed. I needed a way to try and, keep my management system engaging. And when I saw how it impacted the kids and how interested they were, I actually hesitated a little bit, like, wow, they're so into this. This is working so great. But like, do I have the skills to teach this to them? Like, I am not even confident in my own credit abilities, my own spending and saving abilities. What do I know? What if I mess them up? You know what I mean? But because my kids were so into this classroom economy and they were so determined to learn more about money management, that is kind of what forced me through that uncomfortableness of growth, that period, and pushed me through to the point where I really started to get into it and I started to feel that confidence. I compare it to video games because for a while there I taught middle school. And they'll say, girls will sometimes say like, oh, video games are hard, they're complicated. It's not that complicated. You just pick up a controller and you start smashing buttons and you figure out what you got to do. That's my analogy for how I learned financial education. And it worked for me. I also really shifted my mindset to continuing education about this and looking at financial wellness as a lifelong process, right? Getting away from these labels like I'm just bad with money, I'm just a spender. That language really matters. And that's something we're going to talk about later as well. So I'm not bad with money. I just made mistakes. I didn't know what I didn't know. And now that I know better, I can do better. I'm making moves. I am a financial wellness work in progress. I still don't have all the answers and I still do have some debt, but it doesn't keep me up at night anymore. And it very rarely affects my overall level of anxiety and wellness. And when I talked to people at our other trainings, when I talked to educators, I was hearing a lot of my same story repeated back to me, elements of the same story repeated back to me. And that is what really inspired me to look at this summer webinar series and say, let's break it down to a more foundational level. Let's see if we can raise educator confidence when it comes to this material and break down some of the barriers and confusion, have a conversation and see where it takes us. So thank you so much again for being here today. That's my introduction for myself. And I would also really love to introduce and welcome and say thank you to our esteemed guest panelists for today. We are joined by Jenefeness Franke, MBA, who is a trauma-informed certified financial coach and professor, and the chief at Fiscal Finesse Consulting. And we also have with us Minda Michelle Maddox, who is a financial trauma coach and educator. She services the South Seattle and South King County area for the Washington State Employee Credit Union. And I am so thrilled for both of these women to join us and share their experiences. I have heard both of them speak at trauma-informed financial practitioner trainings before, and they're just wealth of information. So thank you both so much for being here. All right, let's get through the part where I talk. Let's just get that part out of the way here. So we're going to start with content. And we're going to look at the spending and saving content knowledge. If I say, hey, could you teach your kids about some spending and saving? What do I mean when I say that? Apologies for that if you just saw that. So first thing I want to say is, let's try to flip the switch on how we're thinking about spending and saving behaviors, right? Instead of looking at them at like, oh, this is just a habit that I need to pick up and practice, 30 days, I'll have it. Let's go and look at how these behaviors are built on and influenced by the social emotional skills we picked up in childhood and carried into adulthood. Because I got to tell you, if you struggled with delayed gratification in 4th grade, I'm pretty sure that was impacting the financial decisions that you're making now, right? I know for me it was. So specifically, when it comes to self-awareness, self-management, and self-efficacy. So we're looking at our self standards within the SEL competencies. There's a lot of individual choice, opportunity cost that meets emotional needs there. I mean, let's think about it. How many of us shop when we're feeling some kind of way? How many of us feel some kind of way after we shop? There are connections there. So this is part of a resource that we have on our website because we really believe in the combination of financial education and social emotional learning. We have an entire section of resources on our website devoted to this. And I would really just like to focus on 2 of these notes here. First, the last one under self-awareness, that wealth is a personal definition and can reflect cultural values and tradition. Well, first, is wealth the ultimate goal of financial education? That's something to consider. And second, we would all, I think, if we sat down and described what it would feel like or look like in our lives to be wealthy, those would all be very different versions. For some of us, being wealthy would just be the peace and freedom of having all of our bills paid. That sounds amazing, right? For some people, wealth is maybe more tangible, boats or vehicles, right? But we're all going to have different versions of that, and so are our students. It's a great place to start. And it allows us to hold space, practice holding space for different versions of other people's different beliefs or expectations. And the last is that the last one under self-efficacy, which is that managing money is a lifelong experience. And this comes back to sort of my personal story, getting away from labeling ourselves or letting our students label themselves as bad at something, and really looking at the corresponding social and emotional areas we are all capable of growing, right? We can poco, paso a paso. We'd say that in my Phoenix school, little by little, step by step, right? We can grow. And so, yeah, this is my considerations for spending and saving as social emotional behaviors. That being said, Washington State K-12 financial education we're a little bit different than Common Core. So we call, instead of their domains, we call them competencies, right? I call this the Jeopardy board, things you wish you'd learned in high school. And so you can see we focus on spending and saving, credit and debt, employment and income, investing, insurance and risk management, and financial decision making. And each of the trauma-informed financial education for every classroom webinar series focuses on a different one of these competencies. So right now, today, we're going to go through the highlighted substandard. There are 4, you can see. We're going to talk about developing a plan for spending and saving. When you receive the slideshow, just as a note, there is also a breakdown of describing how to use different payment methods on that one. But for time's sake, because I really want to make sure that we stay on time here, we're just going to go over the one standard, developing a plan for spending and saving. So let's take a look at what that would entail. So your principal comes to you and says, guys, I need you to teach some personal finance. Where do you start? Well, one thing, you'll notice here that you're not going to see the words elementary, middle school, or high school onto these slides. We're going to reframe that because language matters. We're going to call this foundational knowledge because we got to start where our students are. If your students don't know some of these things, we have to start at that level. If you are more comfortable at starting at a foundational level, that's where we start, and there's no problem with that. When it comes to developing a plan for spending and saving, the foundational knowledge and the first thing is really that we have agency over how we use our personal funds, right? Especially in youth. As we get older, that agency becomes a little bit limited because there's things we are required to do and pay for, right? This is the big one here. Components of a personal spending plan include income, saving, and expenses. Those three components of a personal spending plan. Did you notice that, Minda? We're not even using the word. Okay. It also has another key standard here that I've highlighted. Saving money can improve financial well-being. Again, coming back to that well-being, that finances are a component of the overall person. And how can we do that? You can decrease your expenses to save more of your income. There are strategies you can use, and this is important. They introduce this concept of pay yourself first, right? So saving as a priority, that's what that pay yourself first in financial context always means. I am saving. And then advantages and disadvantages to saving for financial goals. This is important to note because things that are good for us are not always easy, even though it seems sort of culturally that we act a little bit like they are. Kind of like sharing for kids. Everyone agrees that sharing is good, but it's very difficult at times when you're developing the skill for sharing, right? So there are advantages and disadvantages. It hurts to save for a financial goal sometimes. You feel it when you can't have that immediate need met. And it's not always easy. And I think that's a important thing to kind of mention as well. All right. And let's see here. There we go. Okay. Now, intermediate knowledge, instead of saying middle school, right? We're saying you've got your foundation. Where can you build from that? So you see here on the left, I kind of said, what did we start with? What did we highlight on that foundational knowledge piece? Components of a personal spending plan. So we got our income, saving, and expenses. And that saving money can improve our financial well-being. Let's build off of that. The great thing about this standard is it's pretty self-explanatory. They think it's so important. That's the intermediate knowledge too. Honestly, is to keep practicing with the components of those spending plan. Obviously, if you're doing budgeting activities, your DOK level is going to go up a little bit with the intermediate knowledge. So maybe they're actually working with the numbers at this point. But again, they're talking about saving strategies, including pay yourself first. And this is something that we're going to go back to on the discussion because both Minda and Jenefeness have great points to bring in on this. But we also are reinforcing and emphasizing that there are advantages and disadvantages to saving for financial goals. But at this point, kids at this age are going to have a little bit more real life experience, maybe earning that income and making the actual decisions themselves over having a goal. So in this case, I really love also highlighting the idea that emergency funds are useful and important. That's another skill we would add on, or another crumb of knowledge we would add on in this part. Once we understand what parts we look at for a savings plan, then we think about the idea of an emergency fund, and we're going to come back to this part, an emergency fund that's not a credit card, right? It's different. And then saving as a prerequisite to investing. So if we want to invest for the future, if we want to take money and allow it to grow and work for us, right? To have that money to grow for us, the first step to that is saving. Are there any questions on this so far? How are we looking? Awesome. Okay. So once we get into the next level, the highest level. We've got our foundational knowledge. We've built upon it with intermediate knowledge. Then by the time kids, let's say, graduate or we send them off into the real world, it would be great if they had applied that knowledge into skills that they had practiced. And what I love about these skills that are identified in the standards is they're all great real world skills. And I, for one, know I got zero practice in any of these in school. So if you did, please let us know. It'd be amazing. So the skills that we learned there: using and creating a plan to manage spending and achieve goals. So we've taken, the components now of that budget. You know that you take the money you've come in, you pay yourself first, then you pay off your expenses, right? We look at other ways to spending to improve those financial well-being, that we can hit those financial goals as the next step then. Also, we want to talk about whether charitable giving is something that fits into your spending plan at that point. For some people, culturally or religiously, this is a very important part of their financial overall finances. And just because like I didn't have experiences, that doesn't mean that's not incredibly important to others. Talking about how monetary and non-monetary assets can contribute to net worth, right? And I think this is a great conversation to have with students, because in some ways, debt is necessary as an investment in your human capital, right? In certain areas, perhaps in post-secondary education or in building generational wealth, sometimes taking on debt is a necessary part of that as well, if you're looking at like home ownership and stuff like that. So it can be an interesting way to have students look at themselves. What assets do you have that are monetary, and what assets do you have that are non-monetary that you're still investing in? And then again, kind of going back to that first, reminding back to that first foundational knowledge, how can changes in personal spending behavior contribute to wealth building? Remembering we have agency in this, and remembering that we have power to choose what we spend our money on. So again, minimizing expenses, increasing income. These are ways to contribute to wealth building. So that's a little breakdown. If I ask you to teach spending and saving, some of the content knowledge that you could see in that. Do we have any questions on those standards at all? Awesome. So like I said, there's another breakdown that you will receive. And if we have time, maybe we can get into that. But now, I think is a great time to really dive into the financial trauma part of this and talk about how we talk and teach about money. So at this point, I will share a little bit more, but I will be bringing in our panelists, Minda Michelle and Jenefeness, on this area as well. So first, let's talk about trauma. This is a slide that is borrowed from the Trauma of Money training program. It is a trauma-informed program, 17-week program for financial practitioners, trauma-informed financial practitioners. Okay? They always have a wait list, but it's a very interesting program. So trauma is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience that can have a profound physical and emotional effect on a person. And that is a definition I found from therapy.com. I'm going to be honest with you guys. Okay, but I liked it. I thought it worked. And what I like about this slide is it demonstrates that trauma can be a single experience. It can be an ongoing experience. It can be epigenetic or inherited from our genetics, from our DNA, or it can be inherited from the sustained trauma of existing as a marginalized or underrepresented group. So that's trauma. And the thing about trauma is that I've noticed lately is that it's kind of becoming one of those words that we're like throwing around a lot. The comparison that came to my mind, is just a personal comparison, was the term bullying. Like when you start describing everything as bullying, it takes away the power to really focus in when that's a big issue and prevent it from happening. And so I hope that we can, society can kind of keep away from that with the term trauma, because I don't want to cheapen it. It's very real and we all experience it. Financial trauma, right, is a specific type that, again, we all experienced. About 2019, there was a massive nationwide financial trauma that we're all experiencing. But financial trauma goes beyond economic hardship. I think that's an important distinction to make as well. So this definition was financial trauma is a mind-body response to a highly stressful event that impacted our financial well-being. Again, that financial well-being, right? That we're having difficulty recovering from. Financial trauma can impact our approaches, habits, attitudes, decision-making, core beliefs around money. It can be acute, meaning I just lost my job and the floor just fell out from underneath me. Or it can be chronic, which we may observe in some of our students who grew up with little to no socioeconomic power their entire life. And what you're seeing on the right is, again, borrowed from an OWSECU training, but these are some behavioral symptoms of financial trauma. And these are behavioral symptoms identified by one group. So I don't want to say this is not an exhaustive list. I don't know about you, but I found this list really interesting. We have financial avoidance, overspending. I mean, some of them you knew were going to be on there. You could have brainstormed them if I just told you the topic, right? Hoarding, gambling, workaholism. I did not connect the financial part of that. I know for educators, anybody in education, workaholism can be an issue, right? Maybe interesting to look and see if that's a trauma-informed issue. And then I thought these last three were so interesting because I'd never heard of them before. Financial dependence, financial enabling, and financial infidelity. You guys, anyone ever heard of these terms before? That, I mean, Minda's heard of some of these terms before. And in my head, I'm like, well, there's no way I've done any of those because I've never even heard of it, right? See the chat. Great comments in the chat. So looking at this list, are you connecting to anything? Do you see any of these symptoms that you think like, oh, that shows up in my life? Clearly from the story I shared, I was looking at overspending and compulsive spending, some workaholism. So I actually took this quiz as a part of the training that I took, and I'm actually going to share my results with you. So here we go. So it's small. I'm sorry, it's small. I know it's hard to see, but the last three bars on my column there, those are my financial enabling, financial dependence, financial investment, and financial infidelity. So even the three that I didn't even know about, I was demonstrating characteristics of. Well, that's going to lead me to a couple reflections about myself. And I'm sharing the reflections that I wrote down on my notes with you guys here today. So one thing I know about this whole compulsive buying and workaholism thing is that I grew up in a home where the adults were very comfortable rewarding accomplishments with tangible objects, as opposed to like emotion or affection or like things like that. Nothing wrong with that. It's just, you know, I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that affected me. You know, I learned to think of success as something I could hold as opposed to something that I felt. Also, definitely seeing that I needed a dopamine trigger during COVID-19. And that is what I turned to, was the compulsive shopping part. That comforted me. Now I know that when I'm feeling some kind of way, it's better for me to stay away from Target. Online shopping's got to be a no. Take those credit cards off of that auto pay, off of my phone. That was a big one for me. No auto saved credit cards anymore. That really helped me with that habit. I also noticed that as a teacher, my things impacted me, right? So when I'm doing my classroom economy, I'm always trying to get my kids to spend money. I'm always tempting them. Who wants to buy a pencil for this much? Who wants extra candy for this much? Oh, it's Halloween, like a slice of pumpkin pie for 150 class cash or whatever. Because that's how I was, you know? So it's good to have some reflection on these habits. And that's what some of these tests can do. So Linda, if you wouldn't mind, can you drop those links in the chat for me now? So we are actually going to link to 2 different quizzes here. We have a money mindset quiz from our very own Fiscal Finesse Consulting from Jenefeness Franke. It is culturally responsive. It is easy to read. It is fun to read through. It reminded me, it took me back to like, you know, the magazine quiz days of my youth. And I particularly think that because this is such a culturally responsive, this would be great for older students too. I think they would really be able to connect to this. And it's not as, because there's 3 answers for each one, it's chef's kiss. Okay, so 10 out of 10, recommend. You will end up with a delusional, adaptive, or abundant money mindset, and some advice and information about that as well. In addition, there's an option there for the same one I took, which is the money behavior inventory from Dr. Brad Klontz and his group. I would call this more clinical, and I don't know if that's the right word, but it's just, it feels a little bit more like almost like an official type survey. It's a little bit lengthier. There's much more like, you know, agree to disagree kind of a thing, I think it is. Can't remember exactly, but they will email you the results. I will say though, it will ask you for your name and email information. So just want you to be aware of that with the bradklontz.com. I personally have not been spammed by them, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't happen. And if you're, you know, want to be in control of your personal data, just want to make sure you have that option. So we're just going to give people a couple minutes to take a look at those. Unfortunately, just because of our time constraints, I can't give us all like 10 to 15 minutes to complete the quiz. I want to make sure we get to the panel. So just going to give you a moment there to take a look through some of those. The second one will score and compare your financial behaviors the same way I showed you mine. And as you're looking through that, I'm going to switch over to one slide because I believe those are in the chat now. Oh, sorry about that. Delusional has been changed to be more trauma informed. It is now labeled adaptive mindset. Apologies. That is a mistype on my end. I was, just for the record, I was adaptive, and I was very proud about that. I was very proud about that one. I was hoping that's where I was hoping to be. So give people just a couple minutes. And as you are, if you are taking the choice to flip through one of those, I want to go ahead and give you a second to do that. If you're not the kind of person who likes to flip through things, you like to look at stuff later, I'm going to put up another slide here for you. And this is really where we're going to dig into next, is starting this panel discussion on the word budget, navigating that B word in the classroom and beyond, because one word that can be extremely triggering or activating for people is this term budget. I personally would not do them in the classroom because I can stick to a budget. Why would I try to teach my kids how to stick to a budget? I felt inadequate, and so I didn't feel like I could bring that information to the classroom. And so we're going to dig into that a little bit, but I'm going to give people another like minute or two. If you are not looking through the quizzes, please feel free to take a look. What does the word budget, when you hear it, what does that feel? What do you feel when you hear that word? What tone of voice do you hear it in your head? What emotions or feelings does it trigger for you? Can you think of an example in your life? What is a budget? What is a budget absolutely not? That would be that non-example part. I love FAIR models, I'm a big fan. All right, so we're just about, and I'm going to do about another minute, and then we're going to go ahead and start this conversation because I can see from some of the cameras that are on, people look like they're flipping through something. So, oh, cool. That's awful. Now I have to flip through all of them to get back. Great. Excuse me. Apologies. Awesome. Thank you, Linda, so much. So those links are going to be back there in the chat. You know what, Risa, I would love that. Let's go ahead and come back together. Let's go ahead and start that off. If you're comfortable, I would love for you guys to tell me what emotions do you feel? What tone of voice maybe do you hear a budget? Any of your impact, I would be really love to have that shared in the chat. Okay, so I can share my personal budgets were the enemy. Budget is in the same category as the word diet for me, right? So let's go ahead and start with our panelists here. Feels like restraint. Ooh, I love that. I got neutral, needs versus wants. Sounds like a diet. Somebody understands my sounds like a diet. Yeah. Micromanagement, constraints. I love it. Okay, so Minda, can we just start with you? I know you don't even use this word budget. You actively use a different word. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, budget's a dirty word to me. I'm of the mind that budget is, the constraining. It's just very negative to me. I feel like, and I know Jenefeness will speak, I feel like she feels differently about budget, if I recall correctly. And for me, because I have spent all of my life having to temper my words, and words are so important. You know that, how I feel about that, Amy. I don't use the word. There's certain words I don't use. I don't use the word but. And if I do use the word but, it's serious. There are just certain words I do not use. Budget is one of them, because I feel that it is, some people said constraining, some people, all the negative connotations, right? That's how I grew up. I have come to teach young people and the folks that I coaching around using the term spending planned, because I want to spend my money. I want to spend it wisely, and I want to spend it with a plan. And so, my rule of 70, and we can talk about that later, but my rule about living off of 70% of what we bring home means I don't need to use a budget because of what's going on with that other 30%. We can talk about that later or not at all, but we'll
touch on that.
Yeah, I want to make sure, I want to hear Jenefeness.
Yeah.
I feel like you feel differently.
All right. So Jenefeness, I told you this before. I have heard you describe a budget as a plan to know where your money is going rather than wondering where it went. And I told you that spoke to me. It was a paradigm shift for me. So do you want to talk about that mindset a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for sharing your story, Amy, because it resonated with me. And the fact that we're doing trauma-informed coaching, I think it's important for the folks on the line to know like some of our trauma. So I want to lead with that just real quickly.
Absolutely.
When I was younger, like early 20s, I found myself tangled up with a wealthy man who was what I call rich, but he used those riches to control me. And so that's where my money trauma came from. I was young, I was dumb. And then it became like this relationship of abuse, apology, abuse, apology. And apology always was led with something financial. It was like a reward for going back into the situation. And so for me, that's my trauma that oftentimes leads to financial infidelity in my healthy marriage, because I have this trauma that occurred in my early 20s. And you had talked about this, how it's continual healing. It's not something that you say, oh, I'm over that, and this man is totally different, or it's still something that comes up. It's a trigger that comes up for you. And so thank you for sharing that. And I just wanted to share that absolutely it's that abuse apology, and the apology is like the reward, like here's some money, here's a gift, here's this, and so you keep coming back. And so those are the type of clients that we normally deal with. And it's also something that we should be teaching these younger folks, because I was a young woman, and these younger women are absolutely finding themselves in that situation, especially when you come from extreme poverty like I did. It was like, oh, this is amazing. I'm getting access to things that I never even knew were possible. So I just wanted to lead with that. The fact that we all have some form of trauma that we're coming from, getting out of, and still experiencing 26 years later for me, right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to talk about that. But as far as
thank you so much.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it's just thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. As far as the B word, the budget. So a budget is simply, and this is what I tell my clients. Before I tell y'all what I tell them, I had a client that literally got hives when I would say budget because she always had a negative connotation around, restrictions, restraints, limitations, temporary. Those were all of the words that came up for her. And so what I try to teach my clients is to replace those with positive words. A budget is simply a plan to tell your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. Now, for me, in my budget, I have a budgetary line item for international travel. I have a client that has a budgetary line item for shoes. So you can put any and everything in your budget. It's just simply a plan to tell your money where to go in advance rather than wondering where it went once it's gone. Like, wait a minute, where did I spend that? Whatever on. So yes, those are the things that I try to teach clients. Replace those negative emotions that come along with the budget with positive words and positive affirmations, because we all need a budget. We absolutely do. You can't just expect your money to grow and to be healthy and to make room for you and to go in spaces without having a plan for it. So that's what I say.
I love that. What I really keyed in on that part was instead of wondering where it went, because how many of us look at the end of the month, and I now am in the habit of checking my finances weekly, but I say, when did I spend $17? Do you know what I mean? And that would drive me crazy. So the control part of me that appreciates control does actually really react really well to that definition of a budget, which I love. Minda, I know you wanted to add on.
Yeah, I think maybe I can insert my 30-70
conversation. Let's talk about it now.
And the reason I call it a spending plan instead of a budget is because, and this is what I teach, especially young folks, when I go into colleges and talk to our young people who are starting to be in the workforce. I talk about if we can make the habit, if we can establish the habit while we're young, and even now while some of us are at the point now where we're not living paycheck to paycheck, that's where I start. Right? We start with the trauma piece. We start from back here when the rest of mainstream America is starting at savings and investing. A lot of us folks of color who grew up poor, who grew up all the terms we want to use, all the things, right? We're not starting from savings and investing. We're starting from the trauma. Let's start from, I can't save and invest if I don't have anything to save and invest because I'm living paycheck to paycheck. So we have the conversation.
Absolutely.
How can I make more money first? And in this age of side hustles, we can all make more money. We should all have more than one stream of income. That's a whole nother workshop. I know Jenefeness has stuff to say about that as well. I love it. So when we get to the point, and this is what my son is 21, so he knows this is what I've instilled in him since before he was 16. If we can establish the habit of living off of 70% of what we bring home, and again, if we can establish that at a young age, then it just becomes automatic. We can automatically put 30% of our take-home income out, 10% to give away. For some of us, sorry, my dog is, for some of us that looks like tithing. Stop, Zoo. For some of us that looks like tithing. For others of us, it's give it away. Just give it away. It'll come back. I promise it'll come back. If we can do 10% of our income as savings, and then if we can do 10% of our income as investments, and again, in this day and age, there's too many easy ways to invest. Then the rest of my 70%, and then some of us do 10% fund money or 10% whatever I want to do. For me, it's experiences. I like to go to comedy clubs. And when I go to a comedy club, I know I'm going to spend X amount of money because they always have a 2-drink minimum. And for me, that doesn't have to be alcoholic. But you know what I'm saying? So those things like Jenefeness, you have a line item in your spending plan for travel. So I have line items in my spending plan. So if I'm doing 30% is giveaway, savings, investing, and then maybe another 10% is fund money. It's my fund money. It's whatever I want to do money. Then that other 60%, if I know whatever my fixed costs are, my rent or mortgage, my car note, if I have one, my insurance, if I have all of that planned out, then I don't need a budget. And again, I know, and I tell my young people, that takes some finessing, Jenefeness. I love that. That takes some finessing. right? I need to know what my expenses are. I need to know what my income is, and I need to know what my outgo is. And I need to have a line item for certain outgoes that I am going to allow myself, my fund money,
Mhm.
right? And then I can say, okay, now I don't need a budget, because I know that 10% of my take home, if I take home $1,000 every 2 weeks, 10% of that is 100. So I know I can spend $100 on whatever. And the other is allocated. That is my way of a spending plan. And I'm to the point
Mhm.
now at my age and at the point in my finances and career where that works for me. I don't have to do line by line. And
I
I'll
love that.
leave it there.
So I'm thinking about that sort of in the context of a classroom setting. So let's say kids are going through a budgeting exercise. Maybe you set the amount they put into the saving. As the educator, you set that. You don't allow them to the option of choosing how much do you want to save. You have, as the educator, you're leading the activity. You could say, all right, we are going to operate on 70% or even 80% of the budget, if depending on, the amount.
Whatever it is.
So, and then that could be a way to kind of build in that knowledge,
Mhm.
and build that habit.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, talking about income, Jenefeness, I know you on your the Fiscal Finesse program, you talk about all income is income. I've seen that
Yes.
workshop. Yes. Do you want
Yes.
to talk about that mindset a little
Yeah,
bit too?
absolutely. Because here's what happens. And we get a lot of earned income, especially some of our clients, right? They may receive child support, they may receive EBT benefits, they may receive SSI, SSD, all different type of money where they feel like, oh, well, this is set aside for blah, blah, blah. And so they don't necessarily use it for their bills or in their budget, in their monthly budget. And so I tell folks, listen, I don't care if it's earned income, unearned income, if it's residual, if it's, if it's whatever kind of income it is, we need to start thinking about it as income, even to the point of like my children. I have 2 adult children, and they literally ask me for money every month. Okay. And sometimes I say yes. So when I do, I'm like, that's part of y'all's income. Like you're taking your income bracket up a little bit because you can depend on your mama where some folks can't. So I tell folks all the time, it doesn't matter where the income source comes from. If it's in-kind donation, if it's a love offering, make sure that you are accounting for that in your budget as income, even if it's unearned.
I love that. And that actually, I use that in my own budgeting as well. For me, it's like reimbursements. But instead of trying to keep it all separate, just everything goes in and everything goes out in just the same columns. And it was simplifying in just a way you would think, oh yeah, of course, but you don't always think about it that way. Right? Okay, so let's see, Minda, you talked originally, you kind of touched on this a little bit about how when you're working as a coach, you start with trauma and move forward from there. So you start where the person is. And I feel like that's really valuable insight for anybody who's taking on financial education as a subject, whether they're working with students, whether they're on their own financial wellness journey. So I know you touched on it, but can you talk a little bit more about the idea of, like you say, start where they are, start with trauma?
Yeah, and I don't know how many of us on the call are actually financial coaches, or like myself, I call myself a financial trauma coach because I start there at the trauma. So, and for even those of us who we're educators, especially if our students are the students who are traditionally are looked at as if they're Title VI, if I work at a Title VI school, if my students are from low income families, if we're going to talk about money, we must start at, what does my culture, I'm sorry, Amy, were you?
I flipped the slide and I was just apologizing for flipping the slide.
Yeah, we must start at how does my culture view money? And when I say culture, I mean my greater culture. Like my mom's Filipino, so my mom's Filipino culture. How do immigrants look at money? And all the way to the bullseye of how my family and my friend group look at money. So we have to have the discussions about our mindset about money, where our money trauma might come from, where our money worries might come from, so that we can start to reframe. Instead of, I don't make enough money, what I need to do to make some more money. Right.
Right.
Hence the discussion about side hustles, right?
Mhm.
And all the discussions we have about credit and all of those things. So just like, we want to talk to folks about putting a line item in their spending plan for whatever it is, be it shoes, be it travel, be it whatever. Before we even start on the spending plan, let's talk about how we feel about these things.
Mhm.
And now, nowadays there's so many, like those money mindset cards from the prosperity agenda. I love those because there are so many activities with those money mindset cards that we can use. The money mindset cards, we can use these when in our classrooms.
Oh, cool.
So prosperity agenda has, I think they're $50 a deck, and there are 30 cards in the deck of money mindset cards, and there's 10 each of inspiration, identity, and intentions around money. And I would love for all classrooms to have these money mindset cards because they just give us discussion topics to talk about with our students. And I think we can do that at any age. I introduced it to an elementary school teacher this morning because I'm doing some summer programming. And we talked about the fact that we could have these conversations with our families, with our friend groups, with our affinity groups in our workplaces. We can have these conversations. And so, and that is trauma first. Let's address how we think about money. Let's address how we feel about money before we move forward to everything else.
I love that.
If I talk to you.
Jenefeness? Oh, no, you're great. Jenefeness, did you want to add anything on to that part?
Yeah, I would. And I like that, starting with the trauma. For me, I've been doing financial coaching for, how old is my baby? For 22 years. And I always try to go back to the money memory or the mindset. Because a lot of folks, like you said earlier, you said something that really resonated with me. You said we're throwing around trauma like we did bullying, right? So for some of us, a lot of folks, that word is traumatizing, right? And also not even being able to identify that something was actually trauma. So I go back to the mindset. One of the activities that we do is talk about the first money memory. For me, it was being in elementary school, and I think it was second grade. I can't quite remember, but I believe it was second grade. And we didn't have enough money for me to go on a field trip. And I was a straight A student. And so I had to be left behind and left in the library while my peers went on a field trip. So for me, that money memory was, am I being punished? Like, why can't I go? Why is money keeping me from having this experience that my peers are able to have? And I felt some type of way behind that. Did I know that was trauma? No, but I did know I can still feel those feelings even when I tell that story, right? So, so one of the activities that we do is talk about, what is your first money memory? Was it being at the store and your parents saying, have whatever you want? That's a happy memory, right? Would that be considered trauma? No, but does it actually create behaviors? Absolutely. So talking about your first memory, your mindset around money, and those type of things, that's where we usually start.
I love that. It's reminding me of another exercise we did at that OWSECU training where we wrote a letter to money. And I don't know if anyone here has ever you ever participated in that exercise? So those of you out, hey, I'm getting shaking heads, so let's talk about it. If you were to sit down either in front of your computer or with a piece of paper, and thank you, Minda. Minda just put the information on those money mindset cards in the chat. If you were to sit down and you were to write a letter to money, what would it say? And I think we gave ourselves a time limit, and it was a very powerful exercise to sit down and personify money to the point. Once you personify it, then you start to realize its characteristics, how it's talking to you and how you're talking to it. And I know in my letter to money, it was the same thing. My childhood immediately came back, and I realized my childhood is defined by the feast or famine that existed in our finances. Like, there are sections where we had enough, and there are sections when we struggled. And I distinctly remember those sections as the building blocks of my childhood. So it's very interesting to reflect on that. And I would really encourage those of you here in the audience today, if you were to sit down and write a letter to money, I think it might be a profound experience for you as it was for me.
That's a trauma of money exercise, Amy. And
Yes, actually, we have that note in the chat. I was just going to mention that it looks like they did that exercise with a cohort of a participant that was here as well.
yeah, that is they do it for every cohort because it's part of the training. And I've incorporated that into my trauma coaching. And I do it, when I do it, it's so powerful. When I did it as a trauma of money student, I couldn't even think what to write.
Yeah.
And then I kept thinking, and I know I'll guarantee everyone, and whoever put that comment must be a trauma of money person, but I guarantee you'll keep thinking about it. And when we did the original letter, I wrote it in my actual journal, and I kept ruminating on it. And then I went back to my journal some days later and wrote, just kind of word vomited. And it was really powerful for me. And every time I do the exercises with in a workshop, whether it be with adults or young people, it's hard to do it with little people. You know, folks with some work experience, it works better with. But when I do it, whether I do it with adults or young people, it changes for me.
Oh, yeah.
It'll change over time. So yeah, it's a powerful exercise.
I was just thinking, if you're able to, in the chat, do we have any younger, like elementary level educators in here? Just curious, because I'm thinking fifth graders, like I know my fifth graders could do a great journal entry on that. I would love some input from other grades other educators who have experience with younger grades. You know, where do you think that could fit in as far as a classroom exercise? Think it would fit into lower elementary, maybe a classroom discussion instead of like a journal, or maybe a comic book type writing activity as well for like the younger kids. We have a question.
So maybe not, I saw that question, but I want to say something, maybe not a letter to money for the younger, the littles, maybe just what is money to us, or what would I do with money, or what can I do with money type exercise.
The KWL chart, apologies for interrupting, my audio is a little chunky here. So I feel like the KWL chart, so what I know, what I want to know, and what I've learned, that could be a great, even a full year thing. I mean, that's financial education right there. You check in on that KWL a couple times in the year, you keep adding to it, right? Kids may or may not have experience with allowances. I think that's one way that we can really be aware as educators and hold space for our kids too. Really recognizing that some of them are going to have experience with allowances, and some of them are expected to contribute to their household because they're expected to contribute to the household. So one thing I would say, I would love to hear what everyone else has, including Jenefeness and Minda here. Try to look for objective ways where everyone, if you have a scarcity mindset that everyone can connect to. For example, there's a finite number of swings on the swing set. Everybody can connect to that. Where sometimes, you know, you have $50 to go spend here. Some kids are not going to have any context for that and not really be able to connect to that type of exercise. We've had fourth graders create a restaurant menu and then calculate how much a meal would cost. I love that. There's some great skills involved in that too. Can money trauma also be from family wealth to independent wealth too? Like having enough with parent support and then moving out and having nothing but debt. Yeah, absolutely. That is a financial trauma. And I think that's an important thing to recognize too, is I've had somebody in my life who had an influx of money, and that was absolutely traumatic for them. I mean, and it was a positive event, right? I don't know, positive financial event. But they lost friends, family members stopped speaking to them. There were a lot of consequences that came with having more than other people, especially when it was like a rags to riches type of situation. So I think, trauma can encompass a lot of different behaviors, including family wealth to independent wealth. Some of my kids have never been to a restaurant to order off a menu. So this is a field trip we do once a year, paid by the school. That is amazing. That is fantastic. So,
And about
Yeah.
that, letting the kids order off the menu, this generation of kids is PayPal and digital wallets and all of, so, it's not, they have no concept of holding real money and giving, paying and then receiving change, because everything is digital. And so it's harder, and I know we've seen studies of this, it's harder to comprehend or appreciate when we're not physically, tangibly holding, right?
right.
Digital wallets is a conversation that we have.
Oh, yeah.
So for example, when this teacher said she brings her young people to a restaurant to order off a menu, I would love to know how it's paid. Do you just pay the bill, or do you give the kids a $10 bill, or how do you do that?
Yeah. Oh,
Cash per kid. Awesome. Yay.
We love it. We love it.
Mhm.
So let's say a teacher wants to bring financial education into the classroom. They know it has value, they know it's important, but their own finances are a mess, right?
I love that.
They don't feel confident,
Mhm.
right? So Jenefeness, what advice would you give that person, that educator?
I would say, and this is something that I embody every day, I would say just be super vulnerable and relatable. Folks love it when you say, listen, I don't have it all together. If you sit up here and try to front like you got it all together, then it's like, can nobody receive from you anyways? Nobody wants to hear how to be a millionaire from a millionaire who started off as a millionaire. They want to hear how to be a millionaire from somebody that came from the gutter. If you came from the gutter like me, then okay, I can follow your steps. But if you was born with a silver spoon in your mouth and you gonna tell me, hey, let me show you, you be like, oh, okay, that ain't, your class ain't for me. But when you tell folks and be truly vulnerable, like, listen, last week I was struggling trying to figure out, do I buy my kids some groceries or do I buy this medication that my 9-year-old needs? To figure that out is a balancing act for me as your teacher. So when I'm teaching you about finances, I'm trying to show you something just in case you might have similar situations. Them kids are going to be all in like, what you got to say? When you talk about things that they can relate to, that they understand, that their families are actually going through. I've gone into the classrooms and I start talking about going to payday lenders and check cash in places and things like that. And the kids will come up to me afterwards like, man, I didn't know that was predatory. I'm like, yes, and guess what? Your parents probably don't know either. So tell your mom to ask her if you can read those rates that they give them. Man, these kids come back like, do you know when we calculated it was 300%? Stuff that their parents are just in dire situations. And this is no judgment, period, point blank. We just want to educate you so when you know better, you can do better. But when you are truly transparent, or if you go to one of them places yourself and you be like, I walked in this place, there are studies that say those check cashing places, they friendly. They know your name. They from the community. So that's why folks feel comfortable going in there, not knowing they are robbing you, like literally as if they had a gun to your head. But because they're friendly, they're your neighbor, they're your homie, you feel like, oh, I'm comfortable here. No, you shouldn't be. So anyways, I could talk all day, but it's really the vulnerability, the transparency, and just being really relatable.
And that culture, you have that cultural collateral, Jenefeness, depending on the audience we're speaking to. If you and I are speaking to a group of kids of color, they might relate because we're women of color. When I speak to immigrants, because my mother was an immigrant, and I mean, folks may or may not know my story. My mom was from the Philippines. She spent 40 years bringing her family over from the Philippines. At one time, we were 14 of us living in a house because mom was always bringing her family over. I have a twin, and we were told our senior year in high school, mom and dad aren't paying for college because guess what? We're bringing everybody over from the Philippines. That was trauma for me. Mm-hmm. And I carried that into adult, and guess what? And I've said this before too, you know this, Amy, my student loans I'm 53 and a half, okay? My student loans were forgiven last year.
Amen.
I was still in my 50s.
Still paying, yeah.
Even though, and part of that was there were times in my life where I couldn't afford, so I was on forbearance. And then there was a time where I was like, you know what, I ain't paying these. I'm gonna wait for somebody to forgive them. And they were, thank God, forgiven. And yet I was in my 50s, well in my 50s before that happened, right? So, you know, we have this cultural collateral, we have this lived experience that a lot of other people have, right? Jenefeness, that folks are going to, kids and older adults are going to resonate with.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
I love that. So I love what Jenefeness, when you spoke, I don't know if you mentioned, but you went back to the standards for me, which I appreciate very much. This is why we want to make sure our kids understand why it's beneficial to be saving our money within a financial institution. And that is why we want to build some trust when we can with some of these financial institutions as well, right? Because that is how we educate to the benefits of the financial services a bank or credit union offers versus, let's say, a payday lender loan, right? So
think about it real quick, Amy. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
Oh,
if you think about it, when you walk in the bank, they're like suited and booted and tied, and so
yeah,
no young person feels good going in there like, "Hey, Mr. Tom," you know. But if they go in that little corner place, it's like, "Oh, that's Shirley. That's our next door neighbor's cousin," you know.
And yet we know by like lawsuits that the business practices by these predatory lending places do that on purpose, right?
Yes, they do.
So when you're looking at like the conversations in school, you're talking about the kids who have parents who they're going to the payday lenders. They're sitting at the same table with the kids who went to Disneyland for Christmas. And the same table, you know, you're, as an educator, we're servicing like a wide range of student population. So I want to open it up to the audience as we're kind of getting towards the closing here, and make sure if you have questions, if you are serving a particular student group that maybe you're looking for some guidance or suggestions on. But one thing I'm really hearing you guys say is that it can be beneficial to bring people in from these financial institutions, from other financial coaching and lending to also connect. Is that kind of, would you agree?
What'd you say? I'm sorry.
I said that I'm hearing you guys say that it can be really worth the effort to make a connection and try to bring somebody in from a financial institution to kind of break down some of those barriers and break down some of that, what could be a trauma-informed reaction to, you know, a bad experience or something. But do you have any recommendations for these educators to encourage respectful conversations around money for those kids that are sitting at the same table that are coming from really different points of view?
I would encourage, because you know I don't give advice, I encourage. I would encourage educators to start at the cultural sensitivity conversation. You know, what in your culture, because wealth, did someone mention this earlier, or was this something else I was doing? Wealth is we define wealth. It's subjective. Right?
So, that's one of my favorite exercises is the FAIR model with the wealth, the same thing as the budget we displayed, but with wealth in the middle to kind of dig into what it means to each person.
Right. So I would start there. In your culture, no matter what, again, no matter if that is your ethnic culture, whether that is your neighborhood culture, whether that is your religious culture, whether that is your familial culture, in your culture, what is wealth? What does that look like? So I would really, truly, let's start there.
Okay, I love that. Awesome. And then last one of my set questions here. What would either of you say to people who believe that this knowledge, financial education, should not be taught in school and should exclusively be taught in the home?
I mean, well, hell, is it being taught in the home? No, man. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That was so unprofessional. I'm so sorry. Is it being taught in the home? The reason I want us to teach financial well-being in the classroom, and it's not literacy. Again, words are important. Financial well-being, because it's a whole person deal, right? Is because how many of us learned it at home? That's one of the first conversations I have. What did we learn about money in the home? I learned we don't have it. What kind of education is that, right? Do we learn it on our jobs? Not really. We might have a conversation with once a year with HR and the person who comes in and talks about retirement, and that's great, but I'm already working, right? Do we learn it at our place of worship? Not really, except for to give. And I can't give from an empty cup, right? And so I want us to normalize it in schools. And then some of us are talking about it in our families because we are aware.
Right.
I didn't want my son to grow up with the "we don't have it" conversation. And so, and early on for my son, it wasn't "we don't have it." Sometimes it was, "That's not in the, Jenefeness gonna love this, that's not in the budget for this month." And then we started to, now that he's 21 and working, Jenefeness, and asked me yesterday, can he put Uber Eats on my Amex? No, sir. No, sir, that's not how we're using credit, right? So, these are the conversations. So if we're not learning it in the home, we're not learning it on our jobs, where are we gonna learn it? We should learn it at school. And there's so many different ways to teach about money. It doesn't have to be the numbers of it. Let's talk about cultural wealth. Let's define wealth in our culturals. It doesn't have to be the numbers yet.
I love that.
I love
Jenefeness,
that
did you want to
too.
add anything to that?
Yeah, I think Minda Michelle said it best. I do want to address the question in the chat though.
Absolutely.
What would you suggest to teens who can see that their parents are running up credit card debt and excusing it as just a way of life? And I would say to a teen, because first of all, you better stay in a child's place. No, that's our culture. You better stay in a child's place. But there's a way to say everything, right? And it could be just, "Mom, Dad, do you know how much this hamburger is going to cost you if you don't pay it off at the end of the month? Like, who wants to pay interest on a hamburger from Wendy's?" Like, these are the type of things that then make the light bulb go off. But when you just talk about the totality of credit card debt, you start thinking about the things that we're putting on those credit cards and allowing interest to build up. And when you start looking at, are you kidding me? I pay $50 for a $5 hamburger? Then it makes sense. Then it's like, oh my goodness, never again will I do that. Never again will I allow this pay the minimum balance on crap that I did not need, on crap that was super small that is now, this astronomical. So I think just saying, hey, I learned this. Did you know that if you don't pay your credit card off, you're eventually paying $50 for a hamburger?
Yeah. And it's going to take you years to pay that off.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the fact that we're not taught. I put it in the chat. We are taught this country is in debt because we're taught to be freaking consumers. Let's talk about being owners. Let's talk about being business owners. Let's talk about being property owners. Let's talk about having more than one stream of income and not just being a W-2 employee. Let's talk about that. And then we can get past, because we are such a consumer. And how do I wrote it in the chat. How do I keep up with the Joneses on TV,
Right,
social media? And every time I turn around, I'm trying to keep up with somebody else. Well, the grass is greener over there on the other side and their water bill's higher. Did you know that?
Amen. I would also add that what I'm hearing you guys say, for Jenefeness sake, take some of the math out of it and really drill down into what you're actually paying for to help them recognize what those compounding costs are. And I'm hearing Michelle say, like, really recognize the role of our consumer-driven economy in this compulsive spending thing. But one other thing I would love for you to touch on, Minda, we talked about this a little bit, is the idea of the emergency fund, the importance of the emergency fund that is not just a credit card. I think that's another thing that we often say, oh, you should have savings for emergencies, right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of an abstract thing.
Well, and
but I
how
know you feel
country,
pretty strongly about that.
Well, because how many of us are my credit cards for emergency only? How many of us grew up that way? I only use my credit cards for emergencies. Well, if I have a $5,000 emergency that I charge, Jenefeness, and I can't pay it off at the end of the billing period, how long is it going to take me to pay off that $5,000 times 29% interest.
Mhm.
Times how many years, right? And so that's why I talk about, you know, the 10% savings and the 10% investment, because that savings becomes my emergency fund. A set of tires for my car is $800. And so that's going to be part of my 10% savings, is because I don't want to have to charge $800, even if I can pay it off in 2 months. I don't want to have to charge it if I could have been saving it. So that's, again, I completely understand, if we're living paycheck to paycheck, we got to get to that place. And again, if we can teach our young people to start with that, start with savings, paying ourselves first, start with investing. It's too easy to invest. Then they never miss the money. If we automate those things, there's a book called Automatic Millionaire. And again, we have to start from if I can afford it, right? But the book Automatic Millionaire talks about automating savings, automating investing, automating giving away, automating saving certain line items for travel or whatever it might be. Automate that stuff.
I love that.
Yeah.
Looks like we had a little follow-up to the question. Let's see, Jenefeness, that you kind of circled back. Thank you for that within the chat as well. And I do think one other thing I want to just kind of reminding me, I think it's important for our kids and adults to recognize too, that people don't lend money out of the goodness of their heart. None of these businesses exist because they're nice. And I think that was actually a misconception, like I kind of grew up with, to be honest with you, because I just didn't know. But these businesses exist to make money. Financial institutions exist to make money. That is why they exist. So with the credit card, like it's a use, it's a compulsion. I understand what you're saying, I think, to use it. Kind of just lost my train a little bit there. I was trying to make a connection.
I think it just really goes back to that instant gratification, starting to look at what do I want in the future? And if I am spoiling all of my wealth today, what kind of future will I have? So helping to identify some of those values, you know, some of the goals, and then aligning our current actions to those. I think that's just a better way, especially when you're dealing with folks who are not mentally well, right? When you're not mentally well, you can't rationalize with me, you know, but you can help me to understand by educating me in a trauma-informed approach, right? Because you can't talk to me like you talk to the next person, because I don't understand. Right. My mind won't even grapple, you know, what you're trying to tell me. But when you start to say things like, hey, you know, here's your why. Here's what you said was important to you. Here's what you said you value. Does this align with that? You know, spending $50 on a cheeseburger, does that align with what you said you value? Then it's like, no.
Right.
And if that is a value of yours, because some people they don't mind spending $50 on a hamburger or an expensive meal or whatever that is, then that becomes a line item in your spending plan. If I value going out and having the experience of eating a great meal, an expensive meal with my friends or family, or even by myself, put it as a line item in my spending plan.
I was talking about $50 from Wendy's, baby.
Oh, no.
not from a restaurant. I'm talking about from Wendy's.
Drive-through.
From the drive-through.
Well, shoot, that's how much it costs nowadays.
Honestly.
I mean, yeah, it is getting expensive.
So I do think, Risa, thank you so much for the comment. And I think I'm hoping that we can, you know, hopefully you've learned some tools here to maybe layer and model some of those positive financial habits for the student, and see if you can provide maybe an alternative for them, or at least show them maybe an alternative spending model that they might be able to pick up on, because clearly that kid is going to experience some financial trauma if all of these spending or all of these bills kind of come to a head as well. So love it. Okay, I want to end on one. Thank you so much. I just also realized, I am so sorry, we never even got a chance to properly introduce either of you, or let you introduce yourselves before we just jumped into the content. But Jenefeness, would you like to take a moment and talk about yourself and your business?
Sure. So I am Jenefeness Franke. I am the chief at Fiscal Finesse Consulting, where we primarily focus on the folks who are financially unwell. And we help them to get to a better place of well-being. So we created a program called the Level Up Credit Improvement Movement. We are working directly with Tacoma Housing Authority, Bremerton Housing Authority, and we will be getting into Thurston. But working with the residents there who are already in different financial situations and bringing them education and awarding them for reaching those goals, for reaching those milestones, and making the light bulb go off. And it's been a tremendous success. And I'm super duper excited about the work that we're able to do in community. And then also that travels down to generations. We've helped folks to purchase homes, to lower their interest rates, just to kind of understand money better. And then guess what? They teach that to their children. And so they're breaking those generational curses and really getting to a place of well-being. So super excited about the work we do. I also teach, and I love that as well, but that's what we do. I will put my information in the chat. I look forward to helping. I do go into the classrooms. We have a curriculum for the classrooms as well. But I'm excited about financial well-being, period. But I will put my information in the chat.
Thank you so much for being here, Jenefeness. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate, and I sincerely apologize for mispronouncing your last name. I didn't put the E on it earlier. Won't make that mistake again. Miss Minda Michelle.
Yay. So today I'm here as an employee of my credit union. And you said financial institutions exist to make money, not credit unions.
Not credit unions.
Credit
Sorry,
unions
I should have made that exception. Should have made that exception.
Credit unions are not for profit. So we take whatever profits we make and we put it back into the community and the credit union. So that's the difference between a credit union and a bank. So my W-2 job is with my credit union, and I do the going into the classrooms, going into senior citizenship centers, going wherever, whoever will have me in communities and talking about money. And we have workshops and curriculum as well. And for my business, because we got to have more than one stream of income, y'all. So I train financial coaches that's one of my business, and another one as well. So for the credit union, I do financial coaching, and I am a financial educator. And for Double Portion, for my business, I train financial coaches, and and I do it through a trauma lens and through a cultural lens. So.
And she inspired our last slide. This is a direct Minda Michelle inspired slide. Thank you, Minda, for being here and for sharing your expertise and lived experience with us. Jenefeness as well. Thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I would like to share this last slide with everyone, because one thing I have learned working with Minda is that our words matter. And we talk about this a lot in the context of terms like financial literacy. Well, what is literacy? Versus financial education, right? So sometimes just the term you use can turn a person off from learning about something or pique their interest about learning about something. So we know this. So one thing that I advocate for, I think, how do you talk to yourself about money? How are we encouraging our students and our children to talk to themselves about money? And I think in general, we could all talk to ourselves nicer. But I think financial affirmations can be a great way of encouraging a positive mindset, agency, just that we are capable of financial wellness, right? Financial well-being, and of having it be a part of our overall well-being, a slice of the pie, if you will, but it shouldn't affect the whole pie. And that's really the goal of that financial wellness. So these are a little bit more generic, but I added the exclamation points at the end, because I believe if you're talking to yourself and you're giving a positive affirmation, we should do it with some energy. So you deserve a prosperous life. I am worthy of a solid financial foundation. I can become financially free. I am a very capable person that can tackle all money obstacles. And I believe in my ability to use the money that comes into my life to meet my financial goals. If you've never done affirmations before, it can feel a little hokey when you start, but it is genuinely wonderful to look yourself in the mirror and say nice things to yourself at least once a day. So I would encourage that. So please just remember that words matter, and to speak kindly to yourself and to encourage your students to speak kindly to themselves about finances. This is a lifelong learning experience. What you're giving them in any classroom situation is more than many students are getting. And thank you so much for being here. I want to make sure I end on time because, again, former classroom educator, I respect the summer. Okay, we have a whole series. This is just one of 8. You can follow the same link that you used the first time. Next week, we are talking about building credit confidence with Sierra Bonds from Credit Consulting, and a classroom teacher who uses a classroom credit score as a classroom management system to teach kids about credit. And then after that, we're looking at applying those credit skills into buying a vehicle or financing a vehicle. And we'll be hearing from a car salesman's point of view, as well as information on credit scores and what the standards look like related to those. And finally, here's my contact information. This is my digital business card. If you need it, you can snap it and get in touch with me anytime. And thank you again so much for being here, for giving up an hour and a half of your time. Thank you for leaning into the discussion on trauma and trauma-informed financial practices or financial education. Thank you for your participation in the chat. Thank you again to my amazing panelists. I appreciate your time so much. And if you have any, yes, they will all be at the same day and the same time. Will be 4 to 5:30 for the next 8 weeks. The survey will be emailed directly to you, as Linda mentioned earlier, but we're at 5:30 and I wanna say thank you again. You guys have a wonderful evening and I hope to see you again back next week. If you have any feedback for us, please let me know.